students make presentations on how these authentic resources relate to their own or other people's experiences or perspective, and thus this is personal response adaptations. Now let's see the importance and benefits of authentic resources in L2. All three of these are great, but I really stick with the third one: motivation, engagement, and relevance. Authentic materials can be more motivating and stimulating for learners as they include interest and relevant content. Learners are exposed to language they will encounter in real life and communicate effectively. Next, we have exploring authentic resources and cultural competence. In addition to what I just said, students have to be taught how to investigate the product, the practices, and interact with language and behaviors in order to understand cultural perspectives. I love the way my coworker, Sherry, sums it all. She always says, what is culture if students cannot see it, feel it, taste it, or experience it? I just love it. That's when you see if you're really hitting culture, when you actually teach. So selecting, how are we going to select or adapt authentic resources? It's very crucial. So needless to say, we don't want to get it wrong. Suggestions are to follow certain criteria when selecting authentic materials. And here I have Leslie Grant, who identified 4 A's. And so we have the material should be authentic, appealing, accessible, and aligned. Plus, we have to keep in mind our students' performance levels and, of course, the continuum voice where you want to take your students to. And by choosing the appropriate resources, students will develop linguistic competence. They will build confidence because they are able to read and understand text written by native speakers without dictionaries or AI. So the extensions, I have 2 extensions here. The first one, I download some selected student recordings. Yes, you can do that on Extempore, anonymously, of course. Then I use this as listening and discussions activities. In this case, the focus is on how students wrote their irony line. It stimulates and encourages critical thinking. Students are exposed to the language nuances. I close this activity with a voting exit ticket. And sometimes the students are, oh no, it's not fair. It's voting. They don't know who they are voting for. So, and then the B part, the second extension here, students make presentations on how these authentic resources relate to their own or other people's experiences or perspective, and thus this is personal response adaptations. And of course, because it was on racism or bullying and tolerance, so it is personal response adaptations. Was done. So with the countries, I implicitly teach the variation of the prepositions without making a whole lesson on that. And so it is in context, and students are using the language for something. It's not isolated. But notice how students and I co-construct the content in this case. They share their choices, and I facilitate their learning. I share the generated document as a PDF or printed, plus an audio format in Google Classroom. The student practice their listening They can reread, they can highlight words, annotate, translate, and then they rewatch the video. But this time we have the sound, and they make choices and match event sentences, and then they choose the thinking map. It can be bridge, tree, whichever the one, to organize their presentation. The shared steps show the cultural exploration, which is an adaptation of the authentic resource. So here the students explore tradition, customs, and all of this is made accessible to students. On Extempore, students get into sync groups and they retell the events, present their thinking maps, and they share their feelings about celebrations. They have reaction expressions, séjourner, super, etc. from the classmates. They have questions from their peers, at least one. And so empowering students through presentational and interpersonal communication. The extension for this activity, the students had to recircle, so we had to recycle their choices and make connections through comparison with celebrations in their families or in the US or any other country they want. And this enriches different culture, perspective, and behaviors. At the end of the unit, we had a live 1-minute presentation. They analyze information on the infographic, and then you can see the picture on the right-hand side showing student work on, can they decode the gender, the number, and understand what activities the tourists were doing in those landmarks. So here the feedback is kind of immediate because I used in slides, and so it's just an activity loaded with scaffolding activities. On Extempore, student practice reading the tense with X. They discover French activities with regard to landmarks, and thus reinforcing reading through intonation and fluency. The extension was a mini project. The adaptation was cultural analysis. So students search other landmarks plus activities carried in those places. They identify differences and similarities. They use French-speaking countries and other countries of their choice. They create one kind of a time capsule of chosen landmarks of the past travels, and they can print or draw their work. No name is included. Pay attention here, no name is included because the follow-up is important for that. And so they insert their work in a jar or in a box, and then they leave it on that desk. Then I do the exchange. I have to exchange the jar or the box, placing it on a different student text. The last text here is to have students read and guess whose time capsule they were having on their desk. And then the follow-up with the recording, finding, guessing on the post-it the names of the student that created the capsule.